I was 19 years old the night my mother put me out in the rain. Not asked me to leave, not gave me space, not said she needed time to think. She put me out. It was late October in Fairhaven, Virginia, the kind of rain that makes the streetlights look blurry and turns every porch step slick. I remember the smell of wet leaves. I remember the cold going straight through my sweatshirt. I remember standing in the front hallway of the Vale house with one hand over my stomach, because even then, before I had a real bump, I already felt protective of the tiny life inside me. My mother, Celeste Vale, stood between me and the staircase like she was guarding a courthouse door. She was wearing her cream cardigan, the one she wore to church committee meetings when she wanted people to think she was soft. Her hair was pinned back. Her lipstick was perfect. That was the part that stayed with me later. She had not been crying. She had not been pacing. She did not look shocked. She looked prepared. At her feet was a canvas tote bag I recognized from our hall closet. My jeans were folded inside. 2 sweaters, a toothbrush, my old sneakers, a bottle of prenatal vitamins I had hidden in the back of my dresser. Beside the bag was $41 in cash. I looked at the money before I looked at her. That was when I understood this was not a fight. This was a decision she had already made. My father, Arthur Vale, stood near the bottom of the stairs with one hand on the banister. He had worked in banking most of my life, and he had that quiet, polished look people trusted. Navy sweater, reading glasses in his shirt pocket, house slippers on his feet. He looked like a man who had accidentally walked into someone else's tragedy. But it was not someone else's. It was mine. "Mom," I said, and my voice sounded younger than 19. "Please." Celeste's face did not change. She told me I had embarrassed the family. She told me I had thrown away everything they had built for me. She told me people at St. Agnes would ask questions, and she would not stand there on Sunday morning with everyone whispering about her daughter and some boatyard boy from Norfolk. Rowan. She would not say his name. I looked at my father again. I wanted him to interrupt. I wanted him to say my name. I wanted one sentence. Just one. Arthur lowered his eyes. That was the moment that hurt worse than anything my mother said. Because Celeste was cruel. But Arthur was the door I thought might still open. Instead, he stood there and let silence do the work for him. Celeste picked up the tote bag and pushed it against my chest. "You are not bringing shame into this house," she said. "Not tonight, not ever." I remember gripping the straps because my hands had started shaking. I remember wondering whether fear could hurt a baby. I remember thinking that if I begged hard enough, maybe she would see me again. Not the mistake. Not the scandal. Me. But she had already stopped looking at me that way. She opened the front door. Rain blew in across the entry tile. I stepped onto the porch because I did not know what else to do. Then the door closed behind me. The lock turned. That sound was small. 1 click. Maybe half a second. But it cut through everything I thought I knew about family. I stood there with the tote bag against my leg and $41 in my pocket, waiting for the door to open again. I thought maybe my father would come out. Maybe he would hand me his coat. Maybe he would say, "I'm sorry, Marina, come back inside." He did not. The porch light above me buzzed. Rain tapped against the gutter. I could see my own reflection in the dark window beside the door, pale and distorted, like even the glass did not want to give me back clearly. I did not know where to go. I did not know if Rowan was awake. I did not know how to tell him that my own family had chosen their name over our child. What I did not know then was that someone else had seen enough. Across the street, Ruth Calder was standing behind the curtain in her front room. Ruth was 74, a retired court clerk who lived alone in the blue house with the white railing. I had waved to her my whole life and carried groceries up her steps twice, but I did not know her well. Not really. I did not know she had watched my mother carry that same canvas tote from the laundry room 3 days earlier. I did not know she had seen Celeste take papers out of my room and tuck them under her arm. I did not know Ruth had written the date, the time, and what she saw in a small spiral notebook she kept beside her phone. At the time, all I knew was that the house behind me was locked. My father had not followed. and the family name I had been taught to protect had just been used as a weapon against me. So I stood there in the rain and tried not to cry too loudly, because even after they threw me out, some part of me was still afraid of embarrassing them. I do not remember deciding to cross the street. I remember the porch light behind me buzzing. I remember the rain dripping off my hair and down the back of my neck. I remember clutching the canvas bag so hard the straps dug into my palm. Then another porch light came on. Across the street, Ruth Calder opened her front door. She did not wave me over like this was normal. She did not call my name loudly enough for my mother to hear. She stepped out in a yellow raincoat, came down her walkway, crossed the street slowly, and stopped at the edge of the Vale driveway. "Marina," she said, "come inside." That was it. No questions, no panic, no lecture about my choices, just 2 words that sounded impossible after what had just happened. "Come inside." I looked back at my parents' door. It stayed closed. The front curtains did not move. My father did not appear in the window. My mother did not open the door and tell Ruth this was family business. So I followed Ruth. Her house smelled like lemon furniture polish and black tea. There was a quilt folded over the back of the couch, a stack of library books on the coffee table, and a little brass lamp beside the hallway. Everything was quiet in a way that made me feel how loud my own breathing was. Ruth took the wet bag from my hand and set it on a towel by the door. Then she gave me dry socks, a sweatshirt that had belonged to her late husband, and a mug of tea I did not drink. I sat at her kitchen table with both hands around the mug and stared at the wood grain. "I don't know what to do," I said. Ruth sat across from me. She did not reach for my hand. Somehow, that made it easier. "You don't have to know tonight," she said. That was the first kind sentence I had heard in hours. After a while, she stood and went to the small desk beside the kitchen window. She opened a drawer and took out a spiral notebook. It had a blue cover and a grocery list tucked inside. "I need you to understand something," she said. "What happened tonight was not sudden." I looked up. Ruth put on her reading glasses and opened the notebook to a page marked with a paper clip. She had written dates. 3 days before, she saw my mother carry the canvas tote from the laundry room to the hall closet. 2 days before, she saw Celeste go into my room while I was at work and come out with a manila envelope. That afternoon, she saw my mother standing in the upstairs window, watching the street after Rowan's truck passed the corner. Ruth did not say it dramatically. She read it like a court record. Plain, exact, careful. I felt something inside me go colder. My mother had not snapped. She had not lost control. She had made a plan, folded my clothes, counted out $41, and waited for the right night to remove me. Ruth closed the notebook. "I worked at the courthouse for 30 years, she said. "People always think the truth is what they say loudest. It isn't. The truth is what can be shown later." At 19, I did not understand how important that sentence would become. I only understood that Ruth believed me before I had even explained myself. She made up the guest room, though she admitted she had done most of it earlier that week. Clean sheets, a towel on the chair, a small trash can lined with a grocery bag. She had been preparing for me the way my mother had been preparing against me. That thought almost broke me. Near midnight, Ruth asked if Rowan had family I trusted. I told her about his Aunt Imogen in Raleigh. I only knew a little. Imogen Pike worked with medical records. Rowan said she was practical, private, and the safest adult in his family. Ruth nodded like the name confirmed something. "He came by here once," she said. I stared at her. "Rowan?" "About 2 weeks ago. He apologized for blocking my mailbox with his truck. Then he asked me, very carefully, whether I thought your mother would throw you out if she found out." My throat tightened. "He asked you that?" "He did," Ruth said. "He was scared for you. Not of you. For you." That was the first crack in the story my mother had already started building in my head. Rowan had seen danger before I had. He had tried to prepare. He had not been careless with me. Ruth did not call Imogen that night. She said fear made people say too much too fast. She waited until morning, when the rain had stopped and the Vale house looked normal again from the street, like nothing cruel had happened inside it. At 7:40 a.m., Ruth dialed Imogen Pike from the landline in her kitchen. She introduced herself. She gave her full name, address, and the time I had come into her home. Then she said, "Your nephew was right to worry. Marina needs to leave Fairhaven today." I could hear only Ruth's side of the call, but I knew the moment Imogen answered the way a serious person answers serious news. Ruth stopped explaining and started writing. Name, number, arrival time, vehicle description. When she hung up, she tore a clean page from a notepad and copied the information twice. One copy went into her blue notebook. One copy went into my bag. "She'll be here by early afternoon," Ruth said. "Until then, you stay away from that house." I looked through the kitchen window at the Vale porch, the same porch where I had stood the night before. The door was painted black and polished like always. It looked strong, respectable, final. For the first time, I wondered how many locked doors only looked powerful because nobody had written down what happened behind them. Imogen arrived just after 2 in a dark gray Subaru with North Carolina plates and a coffee in the cup holder she had forgotten to drink. She was shorter than I expected, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a clip and a canvas work bag full of folders on the passenger seat. She stepped into Ruth's kitchen, looked at me, and did not ask if I was sure. She said, "Pack what you can carry. We'll sort the rest later." I almost cried from the relief of not being cross-examined. Ruth handed Imogen a copy of her notes. Imogen read them once, then slid them into a folder without folding the paper. That was the moment the second hidden advantage took shape. Ruth had seen. Imogen knew how to keep. And I, though I did not know it yet, was leaving Fairhaven with more than a bag of clothes. I was leaving with the first pieces of a record my mother could not control. By 3 o'clock, I was in Imogen's car, heading south toward Raleigh. I watched Fairhaven disappear in the side mirror. I was still terrified. I still did not know what Rowan had been told. I still had no idea how I would become a mother with no home, no money, and no family willing to say my name. But I was no longer standing alone in the rain. That mattered. It would matter more than any of us knew. For a long time, I believed the worst thing my mother did was lock the front door. I was wrong. Locking me out only removed me from the house. What she did the next morning removed me from my own life. I didn't know any of it while I was riding toward Raleigh with Imogen. I spent most of that drive staring out the passenger window, trying to figure out how I was going to tell Rowan everything that had happened. Every few minutes I picked up my phone. No signal. I assumed the battery had finally died after getting soaked in the rain. I plugged it into the charger in Imogen's car. Still nothing. When we stopped for gas outside Petersburg, I borrowed Imogen's phone and tried logging into my email. My password didn't work. I tried again. Then again. After the 5th attempt, the account locked me out. I told myself stress was making me type it wrong. I wanted to believe that. Looking back, I realize I was still trying to believe my mother had limits. She didn't. Years later, after everything came apart, I finally learned what happened during those same hours. At 7:03 the next morning, my mother called the family phone provider and canceled my line from the shared account. The service record showed the exact time. The representative noted that the account holder requested immediate removal of secondary line. That secondary line was mine. Less than 20 minutes later, someone logged into my email recovery page. The security questions had been changed. The recovery address had been updated. The account was no longer mine to access. My mother knew every answer. My first pet, my elementary school, my grandmother's maiden name. She had spent my entire childhood teaching me those answers. Now she used them against me, but she still wasn't finished. That same morning, Rowan was packing a duffel bag in Norfolk. His mother had been admitted to the hospital again. Her kidneys were failing, and his aunt had called before sunrise telling him he needed to come to Wilmington as soon as possible. While he was trying to figure out how to leave work, an email arrived. It came from an address that looked familiar. Vale Family. The subject line was simple. regarding Marina. He opened it. The message said Marina had suffered a miscarriage. It said she blamed him for everything. It said she wanted no further contact. It ended with a sentence that would haunt both of us for years. If you truly care about her, please respect her wishes and let her begin again. It was signed, Celeste Vale. Attached to the email was something even stranger. A notice that a transfer for $8,700 had been initiated from my parents' joint account. The reference line read, "Moving assistance." My mother had created a story with paperwork. If Rowan accepted the money, she could later say he had been paid to disappear. If he rejected it, she could still claim she tried to help. Either way, she controlled the narrative. What she didn't expect was Rowan. He stared at the transfer notice for several minutes before calling the bank. He refused the payment immediately. The bank generated a rejection confirmation. Without realizing it, Rowan had created the first document that would eventually expose her. He printed it, not because he planned to use it against anyone, because something about the entire situation felt wrong. His Aunt Imogen would later tell me Rowan had always trusted his instincts more than appearances. That instinct saved us. He forwarded my mother's email to Imogen with only one sentence. "I don't think Marina wrote this." Imogen didn't answer emotionally. That wasn't who she was. She printed the email. She printed the transfer notice. She printed Rowan's forwarded message. Then she placed all three inside a gray file folder. She wrote the date across the top in black ink. She had spent 25 years managing medical records. To her, paperwork was memory. Memory failed. Documents didn't. Meanwhile, Rowan drove to Wilmington. His mother needed him. He tried calling my number from the hospital waiting room that evening. It had been disconnected. He tried again the next day. Same recording. He sent another email. It bounced back. He mailed a handwritten letter to my parents' address. Weeks later, the envelope came back unopened with a forwarding label that simply said, "Return to sender." He had no idea I was already living in Raleigh. I had no idea he was still trying. From my side, every day looked completely different. I checked my dead phone. Nothing. I tried logging into my email from Imogen's computer. Nothing. I waited for Rowan to call. He never did. I waited for a letter. None came. Every silent day became another piece of evidence against him inside my own mind. Maybe he believed my mother. Maybe he decided a pregnant 19-year-old was too much. Maybe he saw the money and walked away. I hated myself for thinking it. But loneliness fills empty spaces with lies. My mother understood that better than anyone. Weeks passed, then months. Eventually, I stopped checking my phone every morning. Not because I stopped loving Rowan, because believing someone was coming hurt more than believing they never would. One evening, I apologized to Imogen for bringing all of this into your life. She looked up from the stack of folders she was organizing. "You didn't bring it," she said quietly. "Someone else did." Then she slid the gray folder onto the shelf beside her desk. She didn't label it with my mother's name. She labeled it with mine. That small choice mattered. The lies belonged to Celeste. The evidence belonged to me. I just didn't know it yet. The first time I heard my daughter's heartbeat, I cried so hard the ultrasound technician had to stop talking. Not because anything was wrong, because everything was still there. After weeks of living inside my mother's lie, I needed proof that something in my life had survived. That tiny heartbeat became the first sound I trusted again. Life in Raleigh settled into a routine that never felt easy, but slowly became familiar. Imogen cleared out the spare bedroom behind her kitchen and insisted I stay as long as I needed. She never called it charity. She called it buying time. "You don't make good decisions when you're scared," she told me one evening while labeling folders at the dining room table. "First we make you safe, then we make plans." That sentence carried me through more nights than she probably realized. I found part-time work at a physical therapy clinic answering phones and checking patients in. The hours weren't glamorous, but they worked around my prenatal appointments. I counted every dollar. I learned which grocery stores marked down produce on Wednesday afternoons. I learned that pregnancy is expensive even when everything goes right. And I learned that loneliness doesn't disappear just because you're busy. Every appointment reminded me Rowan should have been there. Every time another expectant father held someone's hand in the waiting room, I looked away. I stopped wondering whether he would call. Instead, I wondered whether he had already forgotten me. The lie my mother created had started doing exactly what she wanted. It was changing my memories. Then February arrived. Labor started just after midnight. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing. By 3 a.m, I couldn't finish a sentence without stopping to breathe. Imogen grabbed the hospital bag before I even asked. "You drive?" I managed. She gave me a look. "I've been ready for this longer than you have." She was right. Everything in that bag had been packed for weeks. Insurance papers, phone chargers, baby clothes, copies of my medical records. Imogen believed preparation wasn't pessimism. It was respect for reality. We reached Wake Women's Hospital before sunrise. The nurses moved quickly. The contractions came faster. Hours disappeared into breathing, counting, pain, and voices I barely remember. One nurse asked who would be in the delivery room. I looked toward Imogen. "If she'll stay," Imogen answered before I could finish. "I'm not going anywhere." Lila June Vale was born at 6:18 that morning. The room became impossibly quiet for one heartbeat. Then she cried. It wasn't a loud cry. It sounded almost offended to be here. I laughed before I realized tears were running down my face. The nurse placed her on my chest. She was tiny, warm, perfect. She opened one eye for a second, frowned like she'd already decided the world was complicated, then settled against me. Every fear I had carried for months shifted into something different. Responsibility. Not fear of losing everything. Responsibility for someone who had never done anything wrong. When the doctor asked about the birth certificate paperwork later that afternoon, I hesitated over one line longer than all the others. Child's last name. I wrote Vale. Not because I wanted to honor my mother, not because I wanted to honor my family, because legally, it was still my name. Changing it would not erase what had happened. Keeping it would not forgive anyone. It was simply the truth on every document I owned. I had no way of knowing that one word would become something my mother would later try to use against us. To me, it was just paperwork. To the future, it would become evidence. The hospital printed 3 certified copies of Lila's birth record before we left. Imogen placed one inside a plastic document sleeve before we even reached the parking garage. "Paper fades," she said. "Not if you take care of it." I smiled. She was already building another file. 2 days after we came home, someone knocked on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When Imogen opened it, Ruth Calder stepped inside, carrying a handmade quilt wrapped in brown paper. She had driven almost 3 hours from Fairhaven. "I wanted to meet her," Ruth said. She held Lila carefully, like she understood babies weren't fragile because they were small. They were fragile because adults built dangerous worlds around them. After a few minutes, Ruth reached into her purse and pulled out the same blue spiral notebook I'd seen the night I left home. She opened it to a clean page. February 3rd, 6:18 a.m., Wake Women's Hospital. Mother present, infant healthy, witnessed by Ruth Calder. I looked at her. "You wrote that down?" She nodded. "I write down important days." I laughed softly. "Why?" She closed the notebook. "Because memories change after people start telling stories." The words stayed with me. Memories change. Stories change. Records don't. That afternoon, she placed a tiny stuffed rabbit beside Lila's crib. Then she kissed my forehead before leaving. Neither of us said the words we were both thinking. My own mother had never called, never written, never asked if her grandchild was healthy. As far as Fairhaven knew, there wasn't a baby. There had never been a baby. That was the story Celeste wanted everyone to believe. But stories don't erase hospital bracelets. They don't erase birth certificates. They don't erase nurses, doctors, timestamps, or state records. Lila existed. She had a social security number, a birth certificate, hospital records, vaccination appointments already scheduled. She had legal existence whether my mother acknowledged her or not. Weeks later, while rocking Lila to sleep in the middle of another long night, I caught myself apologizing to her. "I'm sorry you don't have grandparents." Then I stopped. That wasn't true. She had Ruth. She had Imogen. She had people who chose her before they had any obligation to. Maybe family wasn't the people whose name appeared beside yours on a family tree. Maybe family was the people who showed up when there was nothing to gain. As Lila slept against my shoulder, I made the first promise that truly belonged to me as a mother. No matter how many lies someone told about us, my daughter would never have to wonder whether she existed. The world had already written down that she did. And this time the truth was filed where no one, not even Celeste Vale, could make it disappear. People like to say time heals everything. It doesn't. Time only gives you space to decide what you're going to do with the hurt. For a while, survival was enough. Wake up, feed Lila, go to work, come home, study after she fell asleep, repeat. I stopped measuring my life in months. I measured it in grocery receipts, utility bills, pediatric appointments, and the number of hours of sleep I could squeeze into a night. Nothing about it looked dramatic from the outside. But looking back, I think those ordinary years saved me more than any courtroom ever could. When Lila was 6 months old, I started working the front desk at a physical therapy clinic 4 days a week. The pay wasn't impressive. The hours weren't ideal, but they offered tuition assistance if I enrolled in an accredited healthcare program. Imogen slid the brochure across the kitchen table one evening. "You've always been good with details." I looked at the tuition number and laughed. "I can't even afford daycare." She nodded. "I know." Then she slid another paper toward me, a grant application. "You don't have to stay where life left you." Nobody had ever said that to me before. Not my parents, not teachers, not relatives. So I filled out the application. 3 months later, I started taking evening classes to become an ultrasound technician. It meant longer days. I would leave the apartment before sunrise, work until late afternoon, pick up Lila, drop her with Imogen for 2 hours, attend class, come home, study after midnight. I wasn't trying to build some impressive career. I was trying to make sure my daughter would never depend on people like my mother to survive. The harder part wasn't school. It was learning to stop apologizing every time I needed help. Imogen noticed before I did. One Saturday morning, she found me trying to pay her for groceries. She pushed the money back across the counter. "You keep acting like you're borrowing your own future." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you're always trying to repay kindness before you've accepted it." I never forgot that. Kindness isn't a loan. Control is. There was a reason Imogen understood the difference. She had spent nearly 25 years managing medical records. She believed every important fact deserved a place where it couldn't be rewritten. As her consulting work grew, she started helping smaller medical offices organize digital archives. Sometimes she brought boxes home, old charts, insurance correspondence, certification files. Nothing confidential stayed in the house longer than necessary, but she often sorted empty folders or administrative paperwork at the dining room table. Eventually, she asked if I wanted extra hours helping her organize non-medical documents. I said yes immediately. That was where everything changed. At first, the work seemed boring, matching dates, labeling folders, scanning receipts, comparing signatures, checking whether digital timestamps matched printed copies. Imogen never rushed. "Documents tell stories," she liked to say. "You just have to put them in the right order." One evening, she opened a cabinet beside her desk. Inside were dozens of neatly labeled gray folders. Businesses, clients, insurance, property records. Then she pulled out one more. No label on the front, just a strip of blue tape. She placed it on the desk between us. "I think you're ready to see this." Inside were papers I hadn't looked at since arriving in Raleigh. The email my mother sent Rowan, the rejected bank transfer, the phone cancellation record Ruth had later requested through the provider, printouts of bounced emails, Ruth's handwritten notes, my own attempts to reach Rowan. Nothing new, but everything organized, chronological, page numbers in the corner, sticky notes identifying dates. I stared at the folder. I didn't know you kept all of this. I keep everything that might matter later. Why? She looked genuinely surprised by the question. Because people forget. I shook my head. I won't. She smiled softly. No, Marina. You won't. But judges do. So do lawyers. So do investigators. They don't remember. They review. That sentence settled somewhere deep inside me. Facts needed structure. Otherwise, they were only memories. From then on, she started teaching me things most people never think about. How to read the header information on an email. How to identify whether a document had been edited. How certified copies differed from ordinary photocopies. Why original envelopes mattered. How timestamps established credibility. How financial records could be connected across months. None of it felt connected to my own life. It simply felt useful, like learning another language. Slowly, I became good at it, really good. I started noticing inconsistencies before Imogen did, a missing attachment, an incorrect date, a duplicated invoice number. She'd look over my shoulder and grin. See? Details. I realized details had always been there. My mother just counted on people not paying attention. Around that same time, I found myself thinking about Rowan less often. Not because I loved him less, because I had finally accepted I might never know the truth. I stopped imagining surprise reunions, stopped wondering whether every pickup truck I saw belonged to him. Grief became quieter, less sharp. It folded itself into the routine of everyday life. That surprised me. I had always believed healing meant forgetting. Instead, it meant carrying something without letting it crush me. Lila grew. She learned to walk holding onto the edge of Imogen's coffee table. She laughed every time the microwave beeped. She loved books before she could speak. Every new milestone reminded me why I kept moving. One night after putting her to bed, I walked past Imogen's office. The gray folder sat exactly where it always had, only now it had more tabs, more notes, more order. Without saying anything, I picked up a pencil and added a label to the spine. Marina Vale. Imogen looked up from her laptop. I was wondering when you'd do that. I smiled. It finally feels like mine. She nodded once. It always was. I didn't understand then that she had been building more than a file. She had been teaching me how truth survives, not through anger, not through speeches, not even through courage alone. Truth survives because someone preserves it carefully enough that it cannot be rearranged by the next person who tells the story. Years earlier, my mother had counted on emotion, on shame, on silence. She believed people would remember how everything felt. Imogen taught me something stronger. People forget feelings. They don't forget records that line up. Looking back, those evenings around a dining room table in Raleigh mattered as much as any moment that came later, because that was where I stopped seeing myself as a girl who had been thrown away. I became a woman who knew how to keep the truth long enough for it to matter. The first package arrived a week before Lila's first birthday. It wasn't big. Just a plain brown box with regular postage, my address printed on a mailing label, and no return address anywhere on the outside. I almost didn't open it. By then I had learned something important about rebuilding your life. Peace makes you suspicious. Anything unexpected feels dangerous. I turned the package over 3 or 4 times before finally cutting the tape with a kitchen knife. Inside was a tiny cream-colored sweater. Soft wool. Hand-knit. Folded carefully inside white tissue paper. There wasn't a card. No note. Nothing except a small gift tag tucked beneath the ribbon. One handwritten letter. A. That was all. I looked at Imogen. She picked up the sweater, checked every corner of the box, then turned the shipping label toward the light. Virginia, she said quietly. Can you tell where? She shook her head. Only the processing center. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Virginia was enough. My stomach tightened. I hadn't heard a single word from anyone connected to Fairhaven since the night I left. Not my parents, not neighbors, not family friends. Nothing. Then suddenly, a birthday gift for my daughter. I almost threw it away. Instead, I washed the sweater twice before letting Lila wear it. She looked adorable in it. That somehow made me even more uncomfortable. The second package arrived the following year. This time it contained a picture book about birds, a box of crayons, and another tiny tag. Again, just the letter A. The shipping label still traced back to Virginia. The handwriting matched the first package. Imogen didn't say much. She simply placed both mailing labels into a manila envelope. "You keep everything," I said with a tired smile. "I keep patterns," she answered. That was different. Patterns became evidence long before they became answers. By Lila's third birthday, I found myself watching the mailbox during the last week of January. Not because I trusted the packages, because I expected them. That realization bothered me. I had started making room in my life for someone I couldn't even name. The third package held colored pencils, a wooden puzzle shaped like woodland animals, and a birthday card with no message inside. Only the same letter. A. Lila climbed into my lap while I opened it. "Who's it from?" I hesitated. "I don't know." She accepted that answer much more easily than I did. Children don't always need complete explanations. Adults usually do. Later that evening, I spread every shipping label across Imogen's dining room table. 3 years. 3 packages. 3 different post offices. Same state, same careful handwriting, same single initial. Imogen studied them quietly. Whoever is sending these doesn't want to be found. I know. But, she tapped one envelope, they also want you to know they're still there. That sentence stayed with me. Not hidden, present. There is a difference. Ruth visited a few weeks later and noticed the little wooden puzzle sitting beside Lila's books. "That's nice," she said. "It came in the mail." She looked at me over the rim of her teacup. "From Virginia?" I blinked. "How did you know?" I guessed. She didn't sound surprised, only thoughtful. Then she asked a question that caught me completely off guard. "Did it have only one letter?" I stared at her. "You've seen one?" "No." "But I know who used to do that." She leaned back in her chair. "When Arthur was little, his mother never signed birthday cards." "My grandmother?" Ruth nodded. "Just the first letter of her name." A. Agnes. The name landed somewhere deep inside me. Arthur's mother. The woman I had seen maybe twice a year growing up. Always polite, always quiet. Never openly affectionate. Never cruel either. Just present. I hadn't thought about Agnes in years. "Do you think it's really her?" I asked. Ruth answered honestly. "I don't know. But if it is..." She looked toward the living room where Lila was laughing at one of Imogen's old cassette tapes. "Then someone inside that family knows your daughter exists." That thought unsettled me more than comforted me. If Agnes knew, then who else knew? Did my father know? Did my mother know? Had they laughed about these gifts before mailing them? Were they testing me? Watching me? The questions multiplied faster than the answers. I considered writing a letter. Then I realized I didn't know where to send it. Besides, if Agnes wanted me to know who she was, she could have signed her name. She hadn't. That choice mattered. When Lila turned 4, the package was heavier than usual. Inside was a small silver pendant shaped like a sparrow. It wasn't expensive jewelry, just simple sterling silver with tiny engraved feathers. Underneath lay the familiar gift tag. One letter. A. Lila immediately wanted to wear it. "It's a bird." "It is. Can I keep it forever?" I smiled. "If you take good care of it." She wrapped both hands around the pendant like it was treasure. Children have instincts adults sometimes lose. She saw a gift. I saw a question. That night, after Lila had gone to bed, I examined the pendant more closely. The back carried a tiny hallmark from a jeweler near Smith Mountain Lake. Imogen looked it up. The store had been there for decades. Less than 20 miles from where Agnes Vale lived. Neither of us said anything for a while. We didn't have proof. only another pattern, another thread, another quiet indication that someone connected to my old life had never completely let go. I placed the sweater, the birthday cards, the mailing labels, and the sparrow pendant into a storage box in the hall closet. Not because I trusted the gifts, because I had learned from Imogen that unanswered questions should never be thrown away. Sometimes the smallest object waits years before explaining itself. As I closed the lid, I realized something else. The packages had never asked me for anything. No letters demanding forgiveness, no requests to call, no invitations back to Fairhaven, no attempts to defend what had happened. Just gifts, quiet, consistent, patient. Whoever A was, they weren't trying to rewrite the past. They were trying to make sure one little girl knew she had never been forgotten. At the time, that was all I understood. Years later, when I finally opened another envelope with the same quiet intention behind it, I would realize those birthday gifts had never been random acts of kindness. They had been the first gentle signs that someone inside the Vale family had been carrying a truth they were not yet brave enough to speak aloud. I never imagined that a peanut butter sandwich would change the direction of my life. Lila was 4 years old when it happened. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had picked her up from preschool, and we stopped at a small park on the way home. I unpacked the lunch I had packed that morning: apple slices, crackers, half a peanut butter sandwich. She took 2 bites. Then she started coughing. At first, I thought she'd swallowed too fast. Then I saw the redness spreading across her neck. Her lips began to swell. I dropped everything and grabbed her. By the time we reached urgent care, I was shaking harder than she was. The doctor moved quickly. Medication, observation, questions. So many questions. Does anyone in your family have severe allergies? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I knew almost nothing. I knew my mother liked to tell people she had seasonal allergies every spring. I knew my father took blood pressure medication. Everything else? Silence. There was an entire side of my daughter's medical history locked behind a family that no longer claimed us. The pediatric allergist we saw the following week was kind but practical. "We can manage the symptoms," she said, "but family history helps us understand patterns." I nodded. Then she mentioned something I hadn't seriously considered before: genetic screening. Not because she suspected a rare disease, because modern DNA testing sometimes helped identify inherited medical risks and connected people to broader health information. When I got home, I sat at Imogen's kitchen table, holding the brochure. She read it quietly. Then she looked at me. "I think you should do it." "I don't want to." "I know. I don't want anything that connects me back to them." Imogen was quiet for a moment. "This isn't about them." She reached over and tapped the section labeled Health Reports. "It's about her." She was right. Everything difficult in my life eventually came back to the same question: what gives Lila the safest future? 2 weeks later, the DNA kit arrived in the mail. The box looked surprisingly ordinary: a plastic tube, instructions, a prepaid envelope. Nothing about it suggested it carried answers big enough to rearrange an entire family. I filled out the paperwork after Lila went to bed. When it asked about family history, I left more blanks than answers. The empty spaces bothered me, not because they looked incomplete, because they were. A few weeks later, an email arrived. "Your results are ready." I waited until Saturday morning before opening them. Imogen sat beside me with coffee while I logged in. The health report loaded first. Elevated risk for a few common conditions. Carrier screening. Medication responses. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that changed Lila's treatment plan. Mostly reassurance. I felt myself breathe again. Then another tab caught my eye. DNA relatives. A small notification sat beside it. One new close match. I stared at it. Imogen noticed immediately. "You don't have to open that." I know. Neither of us touched the mouse. For almost a full minute, I realized something strange. I wasn't afraid of discovering strangers. I was afraid of discovering family, because every family connection I had ever trusted had eventually become a weapon. I closed the browser. Imogen didn't argue. Instead, she asked one question. "Are you done with what you needed today?" I nodded. "Then today is enough." That became our rule. Enough for today. Months passed. Life stayed busy. Lila started kindergarten. I finished another semester in my ultrasound program. Work at Pike Records continued growing. The DNA account stayed exactly where I left it. Every now and then the company sent reminder emails. "You have new family matches waiting." I archived every message without opening it. Not because I forgot, because I remembered too well. Sometimes I wondered what waited behind that tab. A cousin? An uncle? Someone who knew my parents? Someone who wanted something? Every possibility felt exhausting. I already had one family capable of rewriting history. I wasn't volunteering for another. One evening I admitted all of this to Imogen. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked something simple. "If you open it today, are you ready for whatever it says?" "No." "Then don't." She wasn't encouraging avoidance. She was respecting timing. There is a difference. People like to believe healing means charging directly toward every painful truth. Sometimes healing means knowing which door can stay closed a little longer. I had opened enough doors in my life that led to loss. This one could wait. Several months later, while updating my health profile after another allergy appointment for Lila, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The notification had changed. Instead of saying one new close match, it now showed a percentage 24.6% shared DNA. I froze. Even without opening the profile, I knew enough to understand what that meant. Not a distant cousin. Someone much closer. I looked away from the screen. Closed the laptop, made dinner, read Lila 2 bedtime stories, cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, did everything possible except think about the number I'd just seen, 24.6%. It stayed in the back of my mind for days, then weeks. Eventually it settled into the same place as every unanswered question I'd been carrying since I left Fairhaven. Not forgotten, just unopened. Years later, I would finally learn that behind that untouched notification was a woman named Tessa Marsh. At the time, she had already sent me a short message through the testing platform. She introduced herself politely. She said the amount of shared DNA suggested we might be half-sisters. She wrote that if I wasn't ready to talk, she understood completely. I never saw that message, not because it wasn't there, because I never opened the page. Looking back, some people might say I missed my chance. I don't see it that way. The truth had finally found me. For the first time in years, it wasn't hiding. It wasn't being destroyed. It wasn't being rewritten. It was simply waiting. And maybe that was exactly what I needed. Because I wasn't avoiding the truth anymore. I was waiting until I had become strong enough to carry it without letting it break me. Sometimes the hardest decision isn't opening the door. Sometimes it's admitting you deserve to choose when you walk through it. There are moments that split your life into 2 parts, before, after. I always assumed seeing Rowan again would be one of those moments. I just never imagined it would happen on a Wednesday morning while I was organizing insurance archives. By then, Pike Records had grown into a steady business. Imogen handled consulting. I managed intake, document retrieval, and client communication. Most days were predictable. Boxes came in, files went out, phones rang. People thanked us for finding paperwork they thought had disappeared forever. There was something comforting about helping strangers recover pieces of their lives. I didn't realize mine was about to walk through the front door. The bell above the entrance chimed. I looked up automatically. A man stood just inside holding a faded blue folder. He had more gray in his beard than I remembered. His shoulders looked broader, more tired. For one impossible second, my brain refused to recognize him. Then he smiled politely. "I was told someone here could help me find an old insurance file." My heart stopped. Rowan. He hadn't seen me yet. I was half hidden behind a tall shelving unit filled with archive boxes. I could have stayed there. I could have let another employee help him. I almost did. Instead, I stepped into the aisle. "Rowan." He turned. The folder slipped from his hand. Neither of us moved. 5 years disappeared. 5 years remained. It was somehow both at once. He said my name so quietly I barely heard it. Marina? I nodded. Neither of us knew what came next. There wasn't a movie reunion, no running into each other's arms. Too much life had happened for that. Finally, I gestured toward one of the small consultation rooms. We should sit. He agreed without speaking. Inside, the silence felt heavier than any conversation could have. Rowan looked older, not old, just lived in, the kind of face grief leaves behind. I'm sorry, he said first. The words caught me off guard. For what? For not being there. I stared at him. You left. His forehead tightened. No. You told my mother you didn't want me. His expression changed completely. What? The room became very still. I never spoke to your mother. You accepted the money. What money? Every answer created another question. I suddenly realized we weren't remembering the same story. Not even close. Before either of us could say another word, Imogen knocked softly and stepped into the room carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She looked from Rowan to me. Then she quietly set a gray file folder on the table. Neither of us spoke. She rested one hand on the folder. I think it's time. Then she left. I recognized the folder immediately. Blue tape across the top. The one she had been adding to for years. My name written neatly along the side. I opened it carefully. The first document was the email. The one my mother had sent. I had never seen it before. Rowan watched my face while I read. Marina suffered a miscarriage. She does not wish to continue this relationship. Please respect her decision. Signed, Celeste Vale. My hands started shaking. I never wrote this. I know. You knew? I always suspected. He reached into his own folder and removed a folded sheet of paper. Bank confirmation. Transfer rejected. $8,700. Status declined by recipient. I called the bank immediately, he said. I thought your parents were trying to buy me away. You never took it? His eyes widened. Marina, I never saw $1. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The story I had believed for 5 years cracked straight down the middle. Imogen had organized the file chronologically. After the email came another document. My phone cancellation record, time, 7:03 a.m. The morning after I left. Then came printouts of every email I had tried to send Rowan. Delivery failed. Account unavailable. Message returned. I remembered sitting beside Imogen's computer over and over again, believing the internet was broken. It wasn't. Someone had locked me out. Rowan leaned forward. I tried calling. I looked at him. Every day for almost 2 weeks. He slid another page across the table. Phone records, repeated calls, disconnected. I mailed a letter. Another document. Envelope. Stamped. Returned to sender. I thought you were gone, I whispered. I thought you hated me. He looked down at the table. I thought you buried our baby. The sentence knocked every bit of air out of me. I covered my mouth. No. I could barely speak. No. I had her. His head lifted. What? Our daughter. The words sounded unreal even to me. Her name is Lila. For a long moment, Rowan didn't move. He blinked several times. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Is she? I nodded before he finished. Yes. His daughter. The room became completely silent. Not uncomfortable, just full of years that had been stolen from both of us. Rowan pressed both hands against his face. I missed everything. I didn't know how to answer. Because he had. First heartbeat, first steps, first birthday, first words. He wasn't absent because he didn't care. He was absent because someone had built a wall neither of us could see through. Eventually, Imogen returned with a legal pad, not because she wanted to interrupt, because she knew what came next mattered. Tell each other dates, she said, not feelings. We both looked at her. Feelings change, she continued calmly. Dates don't. So we started at the beginning. The night I was thrown out. The morning his mother went into the hospital. The email. The phone cancellation. The rejected transfer. The returned letter. Every event found its place. For the first time in years, the timeline made sense. Painfully. Perfectly. By the time we finished, afternoon sunlight stretched across the conference table. Neither of us had solved everything. Trust doesn't return in one conversation. Love doesn't erase lost years. But one truth had become impossible to deny. Rowan had never abandoned me, and I had never rejected him. The person who destroyed our future hadn't been sitting across from me that afternoon. She had been writing emails from Fairhaven years earlier. When Rowan finally stood to leave, neither of us reached for the other. It wasn't time. Instead, he looked at the gray folder resting between us. I spent years wondering if I imagined something was wrong. I rested my hand on the cover. You didn't. After he left, I stayed in the consultation room alone for a long time. Not crying, not angry, just quietly rearranging the story I had carried for almost 5 years. For the first time since that night in the rain, I understood something that changed everything. The greatest lie my mother ever told wasn't about me. It was the one she convinced both of us to believe about each other. People think the hardest part is discovering you've been lied to. It isn't. The hardest part comes afterward. When the truth finally arrives, you still have to decide what to do with it. For almost 5 years, I had built an entire life around one version of the past. Then, in a single afternoon inside Pike Records, that version disappeared. The next morning, Rowan texted me. Nothing dramatic. Thank you for talking to me yesterday. I stared at the message for almost 10 minutes before replying. Thank you for telling me the truth. That was all. It felt like enough. Neither of us pretended we could pick up where we had left off. There was no, let's try again. No declarations, no promises. We had missed birthdays, illnesses, holidays, and ordinary Tuesdays. Those years couldn't be skipped over simply because we now knew who had stolen them. Instead, we started with coffee. Public places, short conversations, sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. We talked about practical things first, where we lived, what we did for work, how Imogen's business had grown, how Rowan's mother had passed away 2 years earlier after a long fight with kidney disease. I listened more than I spoke. Not because I didn't care, because I was paying attention to something I had never understood at 19. Consistency. People reveal themselves slowly, not through speeches, through patterns. Rowan never pressured me. If I said I needed to leave after 45 minutes, he stood up immediately. If I canceled because Lila had a fever, he answered with one sentence. Take care of her. Nothing more. No guilt, no disappointment, no attempt to make me responsible for his feelings. That mattered. More than flowers ever could have. One afternoon we met at a small diner halfway between Raleigh and Durham. Halfway through lunch, he reached into a worn leather envelope and placed several papers on the table. I've been carrying these for years. I recognized them immediately. The original bank rejection notice. The certified copy confirming the $8,700 transfer had never been accepted. The original envelope from the letter returned to sender. Even the receipt from the certified mailing. You kept everything. He nodded. I didn't know if anyone would ever believe me. He looked down at the papers. But I knew one day I'd need to prove I hadn't sold you. I picked up the original bank confirmation. Unlike the copy in Imogen's gray folder, this one still carried the raised stamp from the bank. Original ink. Original signature. Original date. The paper itself felt heavier than I expected. Not because of its weight, because someone had protected it for nearly 5 years, not out of revenge, out of hope. I thought I was being foolish, Rowan admitted. My aunt kept telling me to save every document. I smiled without thinking. That sounds like Imogen. He laughed for the first time since we'd seen each other again. I guess they would have gotten along. They do. He looked confused. They've been talking. I watched surprise spread across his face. Imogen had quietly called him after our first meeting, not to interfere, to verify dates, to compare copies, to confirm every original document matched the archive she had built over the years. Neither of us had known. It wasn't manipulation. It was protection. That was who Imogen was. She trusted people. But she trusted records first. That evening I brought Rowan's originals home. Imogen spread everything across the dining room table. She wore cotton gloves while handling the oldest papers. "You don't have to be this careful," I teased. She looked up. "Yes, I do." She compared every original with every copy, initialed the verification sheet, placed acid-free sleeves around each document. Then she slid them back into the gray folder. "The archive is stronger now." I realized she wasn't talking about paper. She was talking about truth. Weeks passed. Slowly our conversations changed. Less about the past, more about the present. Rowan asked about Lila often, not in a possessive way. He asked what books she liked, whether she still loved birds, if she was nervous about starting first grade. He never once asked to meet her. That surprised me. Finally, one afternoon, I asked why. His answer stayed with me. "Because she's your daughter first. If I ever meet her, I want it to happen because it's right for her, not because it's right for me." I went home thinking about those words. That night I watched Lila sleeping with the little silver sparrow pendant resting on her nightstand. Everything I decided now would shape her childhood. Not mine. Hers. I talked to Imogen the next morning. "What if I'm making the wrong decision?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked, "What decision?" "Letting Rowan into our lives." Imogen smiled gently. "You're asking the wrong question." "I am?" "The question isn't whether Rowan deserves another chance. It's whether Lila deserves the chance to know her father." Those were two completely different questions. For several days, I thought about nothing else. Finally, I called Rowan. "Would you like to meet someone?" His voice became very quiet. "If she's ready." We chose a Saturday morning at a lakeside park. No pressure, no introductions full of expectations. Just a walk. Lila wore her favorite yellow rain boots, even though the sky was perfectly clear. She spent the first 10 minutes collecting smooth rocks along the path. Rowan stayed several steps away. He didn't interrupt, didn't force conversation. Eventually, she noticed him. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Who's that man?" I looked at Rowan, then back at her. "This is Rowan. He was a very important friend of mine." Lila considered that answer carefully. Then she walked straight toward him. Children often ignore the complicated rules adults invent. She stopped in front of him and asked, "Do you like birds?" Rowan smiled. "I do." "Even sparrows?" "They're my favorite." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the tiny silver sparrow pendant Agnes had sent years earlier. "I have one. I see that." She held it out proudly. "My grandma sent it." The words caught in my throat, not because Lila was wrong, because she had unknowingly given that anonymous kindness a place in her heart. Rowan crouched to her eye level. "It's beautiful." That was all. He didn't ask to hold her hand, didn't hug her, didn't tell her who he was. He let the morning belong to her. As we walked back toward the parking lot, Lila slipped her small hand into mine. Then, after a moment's thought, she reached for Rowan's too. Neither of us reacted. We simply kept walking. It lasted maybe 20 seconds before she let go to chase a butterfly. But in those 20 seconds, something shifted. Not because we had become a family again, because we had started becoming something new. Something built slowly. Something built honestly. Driving home that afternoon, I realized I no longer measured Rowan by the years he had missed. I measured him by the choices he made after the truth came back. And for the first time since I was 19, trusting someone no longer felt like giving away control. It felt like making a decision. One careful step at a time. There is something strange about peace. When you've lived in survival mode long enough, peace almost feels suspicious. For the first time in years, our lives had settled into something ordinary. Rowan wasn't trying to make up for lost time. He simply showed up. He helped Lila with school science projects. He fixed the loose gate in Imogen's backyard without being asked. He remembered which cereal Lila liked and which bedtime story she wanted read twice. There were no grand speeches, no promises about forever, just hundreds of small decisions that quietly rebuilt trust. I stopped wondering whether he would stay. His actions answered that question long before his words ever did. One Saturday morning in early spring, the three of us drove to Umstead State Park for a picnic. Lila spent most of the afternoon trying to convince ducks that crackers were a reasonable lunch. Rowan and I laughed more than we talked. Life had become surprisingly simple. As the sun began to set, Lila wandered a few yards away with Imogen, who had volunteered to supervise another birdwatching expedition. Rowan turned toward me. "I've been thinking about something." His voice immediately made me smile. "That sounds dangerous." "It probably is." He reached into his jacket pocket. Not dramatically, not like a movie. He pulled out a small velvet box and held it in both hands for a moment before opening it. Inside was a simple white gold ring with a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. Nothing extravagant, exactly the kind of ring I would have chosen myself. "I don't want to replace the years we lost," he said quietly. "I can't. I don't want to pretend nothing happened. I won't." He took a slow breath. "But I'd like to spend whatever years we have left making honest memories instead of mourning stolen ones." He looked directly at me. "Will you marry me?" I laughed through tears before I answered. Yes. Not because everything had been repaired, because we had finally learned how to repair things together. Lila noticed us hugging and came running across the grass. "What's happening?" I knelt beside her. "Rowan asked if he could be part of our family forever." She looked at him seriously. "For real?" He nodded. "For real." She thought for several seconds. Then she shrugged. "I thought he already was." Children have a way of simplifying truths adults overcomplicate. A week later, Imogen insisted on taking engagement pictures. Not professional photographs, just ordinary family pictures in her backyard. Lila sat between us holding the little silver sparrow pendant against her sweater. Rowan had one arm around my shoulders. I had dirt on my jeans from helping Lila plant tomatoes 20 minutes earlier. It was probably the most honest family picture anyone had ever taken of us. That evening, Imogen posted one photograph on her private social media account. The caption contained only 6 words. "Some stories find their way home." She tagged no one, used no location. Neither of us thought much about it. We underestimated how quickly photographs travel. 3 days later, my phone buzzed while I was finishing paperwork at Pike Records. Unknown number. Normally I ignored unknown numbers. Something made me answer. "Hello?" Silence. Then, "Marina." My entire body went cold. I hadn't heard my mother's voice in almost 6 years. Not once. Not a birthday. Not after Lila was born. Not after every holiday that passed without her. Nothing. Now, she sounded almost cheerful. "I've been trying to reach you." It was such an unbelievable sentence that I almost laughed. "No," I said calmly. "You haven't." A pause. Then her voice softened into the tone she reserved for church fundraisers and charity events. "I think enough time has passed." I closed my office door. "What do you want?" "I want my family back." There it was. Not an apology, not an explanation, a request. No, a claim. I looked out the window before answering. "You threw me out." I was upset. "You changed my phone." "You misunderstood." "You sent lies to Rowan." Silence. Then she skipped over every accusation as though I had mentioned the weather. "I saw the engagement picture." There it was, the real reason. Not regret. Timing. She hadn't come back because she missed me. She came back because she realized I no longer needed her. "I'd like to meet my granddaughter." I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up a pen and wrote the date and time on a legal pad. Old habits, new instincts. She continued talking. "A child deserves to know her grandmother." I've prayed every day for reconciliation. I think the Lord is giving us another chance. Everything sounded carefully rehearsed. Every sentence avoided responsibility. Every sentence moved toward the same destination: access, not accountability. When I still didn't respond, she finally asked, "Can we have lunch? I'll think about it." It wasn't agreement. It was the shortest truthful answer I could give. After hanging up, I immediately typed a summary of the conversation while every detail remained fresh: time, duration, exact wording. Then I saved the call log. When Imogen returned from a meeting later that afternoon, I handed her my notes. She read them once, then opened the gray folder. Another tab, another page, another entry. She didn't look surprised. "She only called after the engagement photo." I nodded. "Exactly." Imogen wrote one sentence across the top of the new page: "First contact after 6 years of silence." Below that, she added the date. Nothing else. That single sentence carried enormous weight. Timing tells motives. The timing wasn't accidental. That evening, Rowan came over for dinner. After Lila went upstairs to finish homework, I told him about the call. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked only one question: "Do you feel guilty?" I thought about it. No. Scared? I considered that too. Not really. He smiled gently. Good. I looked at him. I'm cautious. He nodded. That's different. He was right. Years earlier, one phone call from my mother would have shattered me. Now it simply became another document, another date, another piece of a timeline. The fear was gone. Only attention remained. For 6 years, my mother had built her power by controlling the story. She didn't realize that while she was silent, I had learned something far more dangerous than anger. I had learned to pay attention. And this time, every move she made would leave a record. The call came on a Thursday morning. Not from my mother, not from Fairhaven, not from anyone whose name I recognized. The woman introduced herself calmly. "My name is Maribel Cross. I'm an estate attorney in Roanoke." I assumed she had the wrong number. "I think you may be looking for someone else." "I'm looking for Marina Vale." "I'd like to discuss the estate of Agnes Eleanor Vale." For a moment I couldn't answer. Agnes. The name immediately brought back the little cream sweater, the picture books, the sparrow pendant, the single handwritten letter. A. Maribel continued speaking. "I understand this may come as a surprise. I'd prefer to explain everything in person if possible." I agreed to meet the following Monday. When I hung up, I sat at my desk without moving. Imogen walked in carrying a stack of insurance files and immediately noticed my face. "What happened?" I repeated the conversation almost word for word. She didn't react with excitement. She frowned. "Estate attorneys don't call unless someone plans something carefully." That sentence stayed with me all weekend. Someone planned something. On Monday morning, Rowan drove with us to Roanoke. Neither of us talked much during the trip, not because we were afraid, because none of us wanted to invent explanations before hearing the facts. Maribel Cross worked in an old brick building overlooking the courthouse square. Her office was modest, shelves filled with binders, family photographs, a large oak conference table. She greeted each of us warmly before placing 3 identical folders in front of us. I represented Agnes Vale for almost 11 years. She opened her own copy. "Mrs. Vale passed away 6 weeks ago." I lowered my eyes. Despite everything, I felt a quiet sadness. Agnes had never openly defended me, but she had never tried to destroy me either. Sometimes silence comes from fear. Sometimes it comes from waiting for the right way to help. Maribel slid a certified copy of the will toward me. "This section concerns your daughter." My heart started beating faster. She adjusted her glasses and read aloud. "To my great-granddaughter, Lila June Vale, the child I acknowledge, recognize, and freely choose." I stopped breathing. Recognize, choose. Not if living. Not if she exists. Agnes had known. Not guessed. Known. Maribel continued. Agnes had established an educational trust worth $312,000. The money could only be used for Lila's education, health care, or future housing. No one could withdraw funds for personal expenses. No one could redirect the assets. No one, not even family, could borrow against it. Then came the next sentence. I appoint Imogen Pike as independent trustee until Lila reaches the age of 25. I looked at Imogen. She looked just as surprised as I was. I didn't know, she said quietly. I knew Agnes intended to revise her will several years ago, but I never saw the final version. Maribel nodded. That was intentional. She opened another folder. Mrs. Vale left private letters with specific delivery instructions. She handed one envelope to me, another to Imogen. The third remained sealed. This one, she said, is to be opened only if the trust is legally challenged. I stared at the unopened envelope. Agnes had anticipated conflict before she died. She hadn't hoped for the best. She had prepared for the worst. Very slowly, Maribel pushed a small storage box across the table. Inside were copies of every birthday card, photographs of each gift before it had been mailed, jewelry receipts, shipping records, even the original purchase receipt for the little silver sparrow pendant. Every item carried the same handwritten notation, sent anonymously at client's request. I felt tears gathering before I realized I was crying. It was her. Maribel smiled gently. Yes. She insisted your daughter should never grow up believing every member of the Vale family had abandoned her. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The anonymous gifts that had puzzled me for years suddenly formed a complete picture. Agnes hadn't been trying to lure me home, she had been leaving proof. Proof that someone inside that family still saw Lila, still counted birthdays, still cared. Maribel reached for another document. There is one more matter you should know. She unfolded a memorandum Agnes had signed 18 months before her death. In it, Agnes explained why the trust had been structured so carefully. I have grave concerns that certain members of my family may confuse reconciliation with financial control. The trustee must remain independent. She never mentioned my mother's name. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood. Agnes had anticipated exactly who might come looking for the money. After the meeting ended, Maribel asked us to remain seated. There is something else. She opened her laptop and displayed a timeline. Several weeks before Agnes died, someone had contacted her office asking whether the will had been updated. The caller identified herself as Celeste Vale. According to the office notes, Celeste repeatedly asked whether any provisions existed for unknown descendants. Maribel had refused to discuss confidential estate planning. The call log had been preserved. Date, time, duration. I looked at Rowan, then at Imogen. The timing fit perfectly. My mother hadn't suddenly remembered me because of an engagement photograph alone. She already suspected Agnes had changed something. The photograph simply confirmed she had found us. Every piece moved into place. The phone call, the warm language, the sudden desire to reconnect, the request to meet Lila. It had never begun with love. It began with uncertainty. My mother thought she might be losing control of something valuable. Outside the office, Rowan and I stood on the courthouse steps while Imogen spoke privately with Maribel. I hate that this makes sense, I admitted. Rowan nodded. It also changes everything. It changes why she came back. He looked toward the courthouse doors. No. It changes why she'll keep coming. That realization settled heavily between us. Until that day, my mother's return had felt personal. Now it looked strategic. She hadn't re-entered my life because 6 years of guilt finally caught up with her. She re-entered because an estate worth hundreds of thousands of dollars had entered Lila's life. The family story had become a financial story, and financial stories almost always become legal stories. When we arrived back in Raleigh that evening, Imogen unlocked the cabinet in her office and removed the familiar gray folder. For years it had contained emails, phone records, transfer documents, call logs. Now she added certified copies of Agnes's will, the trust agreement, The shipping records for every anonymous gift, the attorney's memorandum, the office call log documenting Celeste's inquiry. She closed the folder carefully, then she placed it back on the shelf. "This isn't just evidence anymore," she said quietly. "It's motive." She was right. For the first time, we could see not only what my mother had done, we could finally see why she had started moving again after so many years of silence. And once motive joins evidence, the story becomes much harder to manipulate. The letter arrived by certified mail. That alone told me it wasn't an apology. People don't send apologies with delivery confirmation. I signed for it just after lunch. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and addressed to Marina Vale, in the same elegant handwriting I had seen on birthday invitations when I was growing up. For one brief moment before I opened it, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, my mother had finally decided to tell the truth. I should have known better. Inside was a 4-page letter, not handwritten, typed, printed on expensive stationery. Every paragraph sounded warm. Every sentence sounded reasonable. Every word was carefully chosen. That was how Celeste always operated. She rarely lied outright. She preferred language that allowed people to hear whatever they already wanted to believe. The first page spoke about forgiveness. The second page spoke about faith. The third page finally arrived at the real purpose. As Lila's biological grandmother, I believe I have been unfairly denied the opportunity to establish a meaningful relationship with my granddaughter. I kept reading. It is my sincere hope that this matter can be resolved privately without unnecessary legal proceedings. Then came the sentence that made me stop. It is also my understanding that substantial Vale family assets have now been placed beyond the involvement of the Vale family itself. Not Agnes, not Lila, not me. The assets. I read the sentence again, then a third time. The fourth page removed any remaining doubt. Unless I agreed to discuss regular visitation, family involvement, and appropriate oversight regarding funds intended for a Vale descendant, Celeste would instruct her attorney to pursue every legal remedy available. I sat quietly for several minutes. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even surprised. I was translating. Years earlier, I would have read the letter emotionally. Now I read it like Imogen had taught me. What does this sentence actually accomplish? Why was this paragraph included? Which words are repeated? Which words never appear? One thing became obvious almost immediately. The letter never once said I miss my granddaughter. It never described Lila as a child. Instead, it repeatedly described her as a Vale descendant, a beneficiary, an heir. Those weren't family words. Those were estate words. I walked into Imogen's office carrying the envelope. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she put on reading glasses, took out a yellow legal pad, and wrote today's date in the upper corner. Only then did she begin reading. Halfway through the third page, she smiled. Not because anything was funny, because something important had just happened. She made a mistake. I looked at her. What mistake? Imogen tapped the paragraph mentioning the trust. She connected access to Lila with access to the money. I hadn't noticed it immediately. Now I couldn't stop seeing it. Every emotional sentence in the letter surrounded one central concern. Control, not relationship. Control. That afternoon, Imogen called Maribel Cross. Within 48 hours, we were sitting in Maribel's conference room again. This meeting felt completely different from the first one. The first meeting had been about inheritance. This one was strategy. Maribel read the letter slowly. When she reached the sentence about appropriate oversight regarding funds, she placed the pages flat on the table. I was hoping she'd be more careful. Why? I asked. Because this is much better for us. She reached for Agnes's trust documents, then placed my mother's letter beside them. You remember why Agnes created an independent trustee? I nodded. She believed someone might confuse reconciliation with financial control. Maribel smiled slightly. And now that someone has written it down. She wasn't exaggerating. The connection was suddenly obvious. Agnes anticipated pressure. Celeste had just supplied motive. Maribel asked me one question. Have you answered this letter? No? Good. What should I say? Nothing. I blinked. Nothing? Not personally. She leaned back. From now on, every communication goes through counsel. Something inside me shifted at that moment. For years, I had treated my mother like someone whose approval I might someday earn. Now I understood something different. She had become a legal opponent. That realization wasn't heartbreaking. It was strangely peaceful. Because legal opponents don't get emotional access. They get documented responses. The following week, another envelope arrived. This one came from an attorney representing Celeste. The tone sounded more formal. The message remained exactly the same: grandparent rights, family reconciliation, emotional well-being. Then another reference to preserving appropriate stewardship of family assets. Maribel highlighted that sentence in yellow. Again. What? She's saying the quiet part out loud. Over the next month, the pattern repeated. Letters, emails, requests for mediation. Every document used different wording. Every document circled back to the same destination: the trust, the money. The phrase veil assets appeared 9 different times. The word love appeared once. Maribel asked her paralegal to build a comparison chart. Column 1. Date. Column 2. Type of communication. Column 3. Reference to visitation. Column 4. Reference to trust assets. By the end of the afternoon, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Every communication that mentioned Lila eventually mentioned the money. Not always directly. Sometimes it appeared as stewardship, sometimes inheritance, sometimes family responsibility. But it always arrived, like clockwork. That evening, Rowan came by after work. I handed him copies of the letters. He finished reading in silence. Finally, he looked up. I don't think she's trying to become a grandmother. No. I think she's trying to become a trustee. The room became very quiet, because that was exactly what she wanted. Not legal ownership, influence. Enough access to eventually challenge the structure Agnes had carefully built. Enough involvement to argue she represented the family's interests. Enough presence to move closer to the money. Lila happened to walk into the kitchen carrying a construction paper bird she had made at school. Look! She held it proudly in front of us. It's a bluebird. Rowan smiled. It's beautiful. She taped it to the refrigerator and ran back upstairs. The whole interaction lasted maybe 15 seconds. After she disappeared, Rowan looked toward the staircase. She doesn't even know this fight exists. I folded the letters back into their envelope, and I'm going to keep it that way. For the first time since I was 19, I understood what protecting someone really meant. It wasn't shielding them from every difficult truth. It was making sure adults handled adult battles before children were forced to carry them. Over the next few days, I stopped seeing my mother's letters as threats. They became evidence. Every new envelope strengthened the timeline. Engagement photo, unexpected phone call, Agnes's trust, certified demand, attorney letter, repeated references to money. The sequence told a story more clearly than any witness ever could. Imogen added each document to the gray folder. Not hurriedly, not dramatically, just carefully. Page protectors, tabs, chronological order. By now, the folder had become too large for one binder. She divided it into sections. Communication, financial, estate, technical records, witnesses. I watched her work for a while before asking a question. Do you ever get tired of organizing paper? She smiled without looking up. I'm not organizing paper. What are you organizing? She closed the newest section gently. The truth. Driving home that night, I realized something had changed inside me. Months earlier, every message from my mother had reopened old wounds. Now every message made our case stronger. She believed she was applying pressure. She never realized she was documenting motive. And every time she tried to move one step closer to Lila, she moved one step closer to proving exactly why she shouldn't. I almost didn't answer the call. The number was from Virginia. Over the previous month, I had received enough unexpected calls from lawyers, unknown numbers, and people connected to my mother that I had developed a habit of letting everything go to voicemail. This time, something made me hesitate. The phone rang once more. I answered. Hello? For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in almost 7 years. Marina? I recognized it immediately. Nolan? My younger brother let out a slow breath. I wasn't sure you'd answer. I wasn't sure I should. That was the truth. The last time I had seen Nolan, he stood beside our mother in the driveway the night I was thrown out. He hadn't said a cruel word, but he hadn't said a kind one either. At 17, he had watched everything happen and done exactly what everyone in our family had always done. He followed the person with the loudest authority. For years, I blamed him almost as much as I blamed my parents. Now his voice sounded different, older, tired. I need to talk to you, he said. I know you don't owe me anything. But I think Mom is about to do something worse than what she already did. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked through the glass wall of my office at Pike Records. Imogen noticed my expression but didn't interrupt. I'll listen, I finally said, but I won't promise anything. That's fair. We agreed to meet 2 days later in Durham at a crowded cafe halfway between Fairhaven and Raleigh. I arrived early. Old instincts. Never give someone else control over the room. When Nolan walked in, I barely recognized him. The confident college athlete I remembered had disappeared. He looked thinner. The dark circles under his eyes suggested months of poor sleep. His wedding ring was gone. He noticed me looking. We got divorced. I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry. He gave a small laugh without humor. You warned me once. I didn't listen. I honestly didn't remember warning him. He did. When I got engaged to Hannah, you told me Mom would try to run our marriage. I searched my memory. The conversation came back slowly. We had been standing in my parents' kitchen years before everything fell apart. I had laughed while saying it. He had laughed too. Neither of us understood it wasn't a joke. Nolan ordered coffee but barely touched it. Instead, he placed a thick manila envelope on the table. I brought proof. Those 3 words immediately changed the conversation. Proof. Not opinions, not accusations. Proof. Inside the envelope were printed text messages, bank statements, invoices from a family attorney, copies of emails. I looked up. What am I looking at? My marriage. Over the next hour, Nolan told me a story that sounded painfully familiar. After Agnes became ill, my mother started insisting that Hannah combine certain savings accounts for tax efficiency. She encouraged Nolan to let her review investment paperwork. She offered to help with budgeting. She volunteered to speak with attorneys whenever legal questions came up. At first, everything sounded generous, helpful. Gradually, every financial decision began passing through Celeste. Arguments followed, then distrust. Eventually, Hannah hired her own attorney. The marriage never recovered. Nolan slid one invoice toward me. The bill came from the same law firm that had recently sent me the letter threatening legal action over Lila. They represented Mom before they represented me. Another coincidence that wasn't really a coincidence. Then Nolan handed me his phone. I want you to read something. The screen showed a text conversation with our mother. Halfway down the page, one message caught my attention. Blood always outranks paperwork. Another followed minutes later. A judge can read documents all day, but family always wins. I felt my stomach tighten. Those weren't emotional outbursts, they were strategy. Nolan watched me finish reading. I saved everything after my lawyer told me to. I almost smiled. Imogen would have approved. Then he reached into the envelope again. This is why I really called. He handed me another page. It wasn't addressed to him. It was an email chain between my mother and her attorney. Most of it discussed the educational trust. One paragraph stood out. Can the trustee be challenged if evidence suggests she improperly influenced the beneficiary's mother? The beneficiary's mother. That was me. The trustee. Imogen. My mother wasn't looking for reconciliation. She was looking for a legal path around Agnes's wishes. I felt anger rise inside me. Not hot anger, cold anger, focused anger. Nolan kept talking. I heard her on the phone. Talking to the lawyer? He nodded. She said Imogen was the obstacle. Not you. Not Rowan. The obstacle. That single word explained everything. Agnes had designed the trust specifically to keep control away from Celeste. Now Celeste was trying to remove the person Agnes trusted most. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Nolan asked quietly, "Can I tell you one more thing?" I nodded. "It's about DNA." The word immediately caught my attention. "What about it?" He looked around the cafe before lowering his voice. "About 3 years ago, Mom insisted I take a DNA test." I frowned. "Why?" "She wouldn't tell me. She said she wanted updated medical information." I remembered Lila's allergy testing. That explanation sounded believable. Until Nolan continued. After the results came back, she asked whether the website showed unexpected relatives. I felt my pulse quicken. "What did you say?" I told her no. He paused. Then she asked if I'd delete the account. I stared at him. "You did?" He nodded. "At the time, I thought she was being overprotective." He looked down into his untouched coffee. "Now I think she was afraid." "Afraid of what?" He answered before I asked. "I think she believed someone might discover something about our family." I suddenly remembered my own DNA account, the unopened notification, the close relative, Tessa Marsh. For months I had ignored it because I wasn't ready. Now the pieces shifted. "Nolan," I spoke carefully. "Did Mom ever explain why she suddenly cared about DNA?" He shook his head. "No. But one night she said something strange." He closed his eyes, trying to remember the exact words. "Families survive because some questions stay unanswered." The sentence settled heavily between us. I had heard versions of that philosophy my entire childhood. Don't ask. Don't embarrass the family. Move on. Protect the name. Suddenly, all of it sounded less like tradition, more like fear. Nolan reached into the envelope one final time. This time he removed a small flash drive. I copied everything before I left. Texts, emails, financial records, the lawyer invoices. I figured if Mom ever came after me. He pushed it across the table. "Someone else should have it too." I didn't touch it immediately. Instead, I looked at him. "Why are you helping me now?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice almost broke. "Because I spent years believing you destroyed this family." He swallowed hard. "I finally realized the family was already broken. We were just taught to blame the wrong person." Those words hurt more than any apology could have, because they were true. When we left the cafe, Nolan didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask to meet Lila. He didn't ask to come back into my life. He simply said, "I hope this helps." On the drive home, the flash drive sat on the passenger seat beside me. Not because it contained every answer, because it contained something just as valuable. A witness from inside the house. That evening I gave the drive to Imogen. She didn't open it immediately. She labeled an evidence envelope first. Date, time, source, chain of custody. Then she looked at me. "What are you thinking?" I stared toward the gray filing cabinet. For years, every answer came from outside the Vale family. And now? I thought about Nolan, about the text messages, about DNA, about one unopened notification that had been waiting quietly for years. "Now," I said softly, "I think it's time I finally opened the door I kept closed." I opened the DNA account the next morning before Lila woke up. Not because I felt ready, because readiness had stopped being the point. For years, I had treated that relatives tab like a locked room in a house I no longer lived in. I knew something was behind it. I knew it might matter. But I also knew that opening one family door usually meant 10 more swung open behind it. This time was different. Nolan had handed me the reason. My mother had made him take a DNA test, then asked if he had unexpected relatives, then asked him to delete the account. People don't do that because they enjoy genealogy. They do that because they are afraid of what a database might say out loud. I sat at Imogen's dining room table with my laptop open, coffee cooling beside me. She sat across from me, but did not lean over the screen. Rowan was in the living room with Lila, helping her build a cardboard birdhouse for school. I clicked DNA relatives. The page loaded slowly, too slowly. Then the name appeared at the top. Tessa Marsh, shared DNA, 24.6%. Predicted relationship, half-sibling. For a few seconds I could not make the words belong to me. Half-sibling, not cousin, not distant relative. Sibling. I clicked her profile. Tessa lived in Asheville, North Carolina. 33 years old. Teacher. Public family tree attached. Her father's name was listed as Gideon Marsh. I had never heard the name before. At least, I thought I hadn't. Then a memory flickered. My mother, years ago, snapping at my father because the breaker panel in the garage still hadn't been fixed. A man in a gray work shirt standing near our kitchen door with a tool belt on his hip. My mother laughing too loudly at something he said. I would have been too young to understand anything. Too young to connect a face to a future. But the name stayed on the screen like it had been waiting for me. I opened Tessa's message. She had written almost 2 years earlier. Polite, careful, no pressure. She said the DNA percentage suggested we might share a parent. She said her father, Gideon Marsh, had worked as an electrical contractor throughout Virginia before moving to Asheville. She said she did not know what I knew, and if I did not want contact, she would respect that. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. Imogen finally spoke. Do you want to answer? I looked toward the living room. Lila was laughing because Rowan had glued a roof panel on crooked. That sound steadied me. Yes. My first message to Tessa was short. I apologized for not responding sooner. I told her I had only just opened the relatives tab. I told her I was willing to talk, but I needed to move carefully. She replied within an hour, not with demands, not with excitement, just warmth. I understand. I've wondered about you for a long time. We arranged a video call that evening. I expected awkwardness. Instead, I saw my own face in pieces. Not exactly, but enough. The shape of her mouth. The way one eyebrow lifted when she listened. A certain tilt of the head. Tessa had dark hair, warm brown eyes, and a calmness that made the impossible feel slightly less dangerous. She told me Gideon Marsh died in 2021 after a short illness. He had owned Marsh Electrical, moved between Virginia and North Carolina for years, and had been secretive about parts of his early life. After his death, Tessa found old papers in a storage box. She held one up to the camera. A business invoice from Fairhaven, late summer 26 years earlier. Client name, Celeste Vale. Service address, my childhood home. I couldn't speak. Tessa's voice softened. I have something else. She showed me a folded letter, not addressed to anyone. More like a note Gideon had written and never sent. Tessa read only the relevant part. He mentioned Celeste in Fairhaven. He mentioned a pregnancy. He wrote that if the child was his, he hoped someday the truth would not be buried under polite lies. I felt my hands go numb. Imogen moved closer but still did not touch me until I nodded. Tessa looked genuinely sorry. I don't know what he knew for sure. I don't either, I said. But I was beginning to understand what my mother knew, and what she feared. The next step had to be legal, not emotional. Maribel Cross arranged everything. No home tests, no screenshots, no guessing from a commercial website. If this truth ever had to stand in front of lawyers, it needed to be clean. A certified lab, verified identity, chain of custody, court-admissible reports. Tessa agreed immediately. Nolan agreed too. That surprised me more than Tessa. He drove to an approved collection site in Richmond and sent me a photo of the sealed paperwork. No caption, just the document. It was his way of saying he meant it. I went to the Raleigh collection site on a rainy Monday morning. The technician checked my ID twice, sealed the sample in front of me, and had me sign 3 forms. It felt strangely clinical for something that could rewrite my life. 2 weeks later, Maribel called. She did not give results over voicemail. She asked me to come to her office. I already knew what that meant. Rowan drove me. Imogen came too. Lila stayed with Ruth, who had come down for the weekend and did not ask questions when I kissed Lila longer than usual before leaving. Maribel placed the report on the table. "Before you read it," she said, "remember, this does not change who raised you, who failed you, or who you are." I appreciated the warning. It did not help. The report was direct. Nolan and I shared a biological mother. We did not share a biological father. Tessa Marsh and I were consistent with half-siblings through the paternal line. The probability that Arthur Vale was my biological father was effectively excluded. Gideon Marsh was identified as the most probable paternal source through confirmed relationship testing with Tessa. There it was, the sentence my mother had spent 26 years avoiding. Arthur Vale was not my biological father. I expected to cry. I didn't. At first, I felt nothing. Then a deep sadness rose in me, not for the name on the report, but for the child I had been. The child who had spent years wondering why her father looked past her. Maybe Arthur had known. Maybe he had only suspected. Either way, he had let me grow up inside a secret I never created. Rowan reached under the table and took my hand. I let him. Maribel gave me copies of everything: certified report, lab chain of custody documentation, Tessa's consent form, Nolan's consent form, a summary of the relationship probability. "This is powerful," she said, "but we use it carefully." I understood. This was not gossip. It was not a weapon to swing because I was angry. It was a shield. Celeste had built her pressure campaign around one idea: blood, blood family, blood rights, blood outranking paperwork. Now the word she loved most had turned against her. On the drive home, I watched rain slide across the window and thought about Agnes. Her will had not said biological great-grandchild. It had said Lila June Vale, the child she acknowledged, recognized, and freely chose. Agnes knew how dangerous blood language could be, so she wrote around it. She protected Lila by name. For the first time, I understood how deliberate that was. That night, after Lila was asleep, I opened the storage box in the hall closet. The sweater, the book, the cards, the sparrow pendant receipt. All those years, Agnes had been sending signs from the edge of a truth she was too afraid to say. I placed the DNA report beside the gifts for a moment. Not permanently, just long enough to see the whole story. Celeste had used family blood to throw me out. Agnes had used legal language to bring Lila in. Nolan had broken the family script. Tessa had answered a message I was too afraid to open, and I had become strong enough to hold the report without letting it define me. The next morning, I gave Maribel permission to keep a certified copy in her case file. Imogen placed another in the gray archive. I kept one in the blue folder I had started using for anything connected to Lila's future. I did not call my mother. I did not call Arthur. I did not post anything online. The truth had waited 26 years. It could wait a little longer, because I had learned the difference between knowing something and using it well. And when the time came, my mother would not see it coming from anger. She would see it coming from evidence. I woke up on my wedding morning before the alarm. For a few seconds, I forgot to be afraid. The room was still dark. Rowan was asleep in the guest room because Lila had insisted on old-fashioned wedding rules, even though our wedding was a civil ceremony at the Wake County Courthouse. My dress hung on the closet door. Simple ivory, nothing dramatic, nothing expensive. Mine. On the dresser sat the little silver sparrow pendant Agnes had sent years earlier. I had fastened it to Lila's hair ribbon the night before. She said it made her feel lucky. I didn't tell her I no longer believed in luck. By then, I believed in preparation. The blue folder was already packed. Inside were certified copies, originals where needed, attorney summaries, witness notes, and one sealed evidence envelope Imogen had labeled in her careful handwriting. Ruth's notes, Celeste's email to Rowan, phone cancellation record, rejected transfer confirmation, returned communication records, Celeste's first contact after the engagement photo, Agnes's trust documents, the certified demand letter, Nolan's messages, attorney invoice copies, DNA lab report, Tessa's witness statement, Maribel's cover memo. I wasn't bringing it because I wanted a fight. I was bringing it because my mother had spent my entire life counting on the fact that I would be too stunned, too polite, or too wounded to answer in the moment. This time, if she came, I would not have to remember everything. The truth would come with me. Our ceremony was scheduled for 11:30. We arrived early. The courthouse lobby smelled like floor polish and coffee. People moved around us carrying folders, flowers, diaper bags, and arguments. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense, but it felt real. Life was happening everywhere in that building. Endings, beginnings, consequences. Rowan was waiting near the clerk's office with Lila beside him. She wore a pale blue dress and the sparrow ribbon in her hair. She held a small bouquet Imogen had made from wildflowers and grocery store baby's breath. Ruth sat on a bench with both hands resting over her purse. Inside that purse was the blue spiral notebook. Imogen stood beside her, calm as ever, holding the gray archive folder against her chest. Nolan had arrived 15 minutes earlier and taken a seat near the back wall. He looked nervous, but he stayed. Tessa sat 2 rows behind him, quiet and composed. A woman who had become family before I fully understood what that word meant anymore. Maribel wasn't attending as a guest, but she had filed everything we might need and made sure the certified documents were in order. Her instructions were simple. If Celeste behaves, get married. If she doesn't, stay calm and use the timeline. I wanted the first option. I prepared for the second. At 11:12, I heard the elevator doors open. Then I heard her voice, not loud, not angry, sweet, public sweet. That was worse. I turned. Celeste Vale stepped into the hallway, wearing a cream dress and carrying white orchids. Arthur walked half a step behind her in a gray suit. Behind them were 3 women from St. Agnes in Fairhaven, all dressed like they had come to witness reconciliation, instead of a wedding they were never invited to. Celeste had brought an audience. For one brief moment, my 19-year-old self came back. The girl on the porch. The girl who still cared what church people thought. Then Lila tugged on my hand. "Mommy?" I looked down. She wasn't scared. She was confused. That steadied me. Celeste smiled as if she had found me after a long misunderstanding. "Marina." I didn't answer. She glanced at the women behind her, then at Lila. Her eyes sharpened with interest. Not love, interest. "We came to bless your day," she said, "and to finally meet our granddaughter." Rowan stepped closer to Lila. Imogen moved before I did, placing herself between Celeste and my daughter. "You were not invited." Celeste gave a soft laugh. "Imogen, this is family." Ruth stood slowly from the bench. "No," she said. "This is history." Celeste's smile tightened. "I don't believe I asked for commentary from a neighbor." Ruth reached into her purse and removed the blue notebook. "You should have," she said. The hallway went quiet enough that I could hear the clerk's printer behind the glass window. Ruth opened the notebook to a marked page. October 2019. Celeste Vale carried a packed canvas bag from the laundry room to the hall closet 3 days before Marina was put out. She removed a manila envelope from Marina's room 2 days before. She watched the street after Rowan's truck passed. Marina came to my house at 10:46 p.m. in the rain. One of the women from St. Agnes shifted uncomfortably. Celeste's face flushed. "That is ridiculous." Ruth looked at her over her glasses. "It is written." Celeste turned back to me, recovering quickly. "Marina, I understand you're emotional, but none of that changes the fact that Lila is my blood." There it was, the word she loved most. I opened the blue folder. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough that the sound of the cover bending seemed to cut through the hallway. "Then let's talk about what you did to your blood." I handed the first page to Arthur. The email. His eyes moved across the words. I watched recognition and confusion fight across his face. Celeste glanced at it and immediately looked away. "That was a private family matter." Rowan stepped forward. "No, that was the email you sent me saying Marina lost our baby and didn't want contact." The hallway changed. Not visibly, but everyone leaned in. I placed the phone cancellation record below it. That was sent after my phone was canceled at 7:03 the same morning. Then the returned emails. Then Rowan's rejected transfer confirmation. That was the $8,700 transfer created to make it look like Rowan accepted money to disappear. Rowan took out the original bank document, raised seal, original date, declined by recipient. "I never took it," he said. "I kept this because I thought one day someone might need to know I wasn't bought." Arthur stared at the document. For the first time that morning, he looked at Celeste instead of me. She changed tactics. "Whatever happened years ago, I am here now. I have rights as Lila's grandmother." "No," Imogen said. "You have a motive." I took out Celeste's certified letter. The one about visitation, the one about oversight, the one where she wrote that a child with the Vale name could not be raised with Vale money while the Vale family was locked outside. I read that sentence aloud. Not the whole letter. Just enough. One of the St. Agnes women whispered, "Money?" Celeste's head snapped toward her. "That's not what this is." Nolan stood. His hands shook, but his voice did not. "It is." He held up his own printed messages. "She asked me how to challenge Imogen as trustee. She asked whether family blood could override paperwork. She sent me this." He read the sentence. "Blood always outranks paperwork." Celeste turned on him. "Nolan, sit down." He didn't. Not this time. The words hit harder than yelling would have. I took out Agnes's trust summary next. "Lila's trust is not controlled by me. It is not controlled by Rowan. It is not controlled by Celeste. Agnes Vale named Lila specifically and appointed Imogen as independent trustee because she was worried certain family members would confuse reconciliation with financial control." Arthur closed his eyes. He knew who Agnes meant. Celeste's expression hardened. Agnes was old. Ruth's voice cut in. "She was competent. Her doctor signed," Imogen added, "and her attorney witnessed it." Celeste looked trapped for the first time. But trapped people do not always surrender. Sometimes they reach for the weapon they trust most. "That child is still my blood," she said. "No stack of papers changes that." The hallway became very still. I looked at Maribel's cover memo in the folder, then at Tessa. She gave one small nod. I took out the certified DNA report. "You're right about one thing," I said. "Blood matters to you." I handed the report to Arthur first. Because whatever he had failed to do, he deserved to see the truth before the crowd reacted to it. He read the first page. His hands began to shake. I watched his face lose color. Nolan's jaw tightened. Celeste took one step back. She knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Arthur whispered, "Marina." I didn't rescue him from the moment. The report stated it plainly. Nolan and I shared a biological mother. We did not share a biological father. Tessa Marsh and I were consistent with half-siblings through the paternal line. Arthur Vale was excluded as my biological father. Tessa stood. "My father was Gideon Marsh," she said calmly. "I provided a legal sample for comparison. The report is certified." No one spoke. The three women from St. Agnes looked at Celeste with expressions I had never seen directed at my mother before. Not admiration, not fear, disbelief. The kind that changes a reputation in real time. Celeste's orchid slipped lower in her hand. This is not the place. I almost smiled. She had chosen the place. She had brought the audience. She had planned to use public pressure to corner me into compliance. Instead, she had given the truth witnesses. Arthur finally looked at me. Really looked. Not past me, not around me, at me. "I knew there might be a question," he said, voice low. Celeste turned sharply. "Arthur." He did not stop. "I signed her birth certificate. I raised her. And I let you punish her for something that was never her fault." The hallway felt smaller suddenly. He looked at me again. "I failed you." It was not enough. Nothing could be enough. But it was the first honest sentence I had heard from him in years. A clerk stepped out from behind the glass. "Ma'am," she said to Celeste, "if you are not here for a scheduled matter, I need you to leave the hallway." Celeste looked around for support. There was none. Not from Arthur, not from Nolan, not from the women she had brought, not from anyone. The orchids fell against her side. Her face had gone stiff, the way it used to when she was trying not to show panic. "This family will regret this," she said. No one answered. The clerk repeated herself. Celeste turned and walked toward the elevators alone. The women from St. Agnes did not follow immediately. That was the humiliation. Not shouting, not tears. The pause, the hesitation, the visible decision not to stand beside her. When the elevator doors closed behind my mother, the hallway remained silent. Then Lila opened the ceremony room door. She had been inside with Rowan's cousin, away from most of it, but she saw enough faces to know something had happened. "Mom?" I knelt in front of her. "Who was that lady?" I brushed a strand of hair away from her sparrow ribbon. "Someone I knew a long time ago. Is she family?" I looked at Rowan, at Imogen, at Ruth, at Nolan, at Tessa, then back at my daughter. "Family is who keeps you safe." She accepted that because children understand truth when adults stop decorating it. A few minutes later, I walked into the ceremony room. My hands were steady, not because I felt nothing, because for once, I had not been forced to carry the truth alone. Every person who mattered had stood in that hallway. Every document had been ready. Every lie had met the record it deserved. And when I took Rowan's hand in front of the clerk, I understood something I had waited years to feel. My mother had not ruined my wedding. She had accidentally delivered my freedom to the right room, at the right time, in front of the witnesses she chose herself. People often ask me what happened to my mother. They expect a dramatic ending, a judge shouting across a courtroom, handcuffs, someone being led away. Real life is rarely that theatrical. Real consequences usually arrive quietly. One letter, one signature, one person deciding they can no longer defend the lie. 3 weeks after our wedding, Maribel called. Her voice sounded lighter than usual. "We received notice this morning." I already knew. Not because she had said anything, because the tension I had carried for months suddenly disappeared before she finished the sentence. "Celeste has withdrawn every petition relating to visitation and any challenge to the trust." I closed my eyes. Everything? Everything. No conditions, no negotiations, no final demands, just withdrawal. Maribel explained that after reviewing the complete documentation, opposing counsel had advised against moving forward. The evidence chain was simply too strong. Ruth's contemporaneous notebook, the fake email, the phone cancellation records, the rejected transfer, the trust documents, the certified letters, Nolan's messages, the DNA report, witness statements, every piece supported the next. There were no gaps left to hide inside. The legal fight ended before it truly began. Agnes's trust remained exactly as she intended. Imogen continued serving as independent trustee. Lila's education and future stayed protected. No one could interfere. When I hung up, I didn't celebrate. I walked outside instead. Lila was drawing birds on the sidewalk with colored chalk. She looked up. "Good news?" I smiled. "Very good news." She nodded once. "Can we still get ice cream?" Children have remarkable priorities. Absolutely. That afternoon we celebrated with mint chocolate chip cones instead of champagne. It felt more appropriate. A month later, another piece of news arrived. This one didn't come from Maribel. It came from Ruth. She called one evening while Rowan and I were making dinner. "You might hear about this from someone else." "What happened?" "The church board voted." I waited. "Celeste resigned." Ruth corrected herself immediately. "Officially, she resigned." We both knew what that meant. The women who had stood in the courthouse hallway had spoken. Then others had asked questions. Questions became requests for financial records. Financial records became an internal review. The board discovered years of poor oversight involving charitable funds. Nothing criminal, but enough undisclosed reimbursements, undocumented expenditures, and conflicts of interest that the leadership removed her authority over church finances. The same woman who once insisted reputation mattered more than truth had lost both at the same time. Not because of gossip, because people finally started reading documents instead of listening to speeches. Several weeks later, Nolan called. "Hannah agreed to coffee." I smiled. "That's good. We're not getting back together." "I know. But she said she finally understands." He laughed quietly. "So do I." He had started therapy, sold the old house, taken a job farther away from Fairhaven. For the first time in his adult life, he was making decisions that weren't filtered through our mother's approval. Healing looked different for him, but it was still healing. Tessa became part of our lives slowly. No dramatic family reunions, no attempts to replace lost years. She visited twice that first summer. Lila adored her almost immediately. Apparently sharing the same crooked smile made building birdhouses much easier. Sometimes I caught myself watching Tessa laugh and wondering what life might have looked like if the truth had been spoken decades earlier. Eventually, I stopped asking. There are questions that explain the past. There are others that steal the present. I had learned the difference. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived from Fairhaven. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter, Arthur's handwriting. I sat on the porch before opening it. He began without excuses. "I have rewritten this letter more times than I can count." The first page contained something I had waited my entire childhood to hear. "I knew there was a possibility I was not your biological father." Not certainty. Possibility. He explained that he confronted Celeste once after I was born. She denied everything. He chose silence, not because he believed her, because he was ashamed. Ashamed of what people might think. Ashamed of admitting his marriage had been built on lies. Ashamed that the truth would become public. So he convinced himself protecting appearances was the same as protecting family. It wasn't. The second page hurt more. "The night you left, I knew I should stop your mother. I did nothing. That failure belongs to me. No blame, no justification, just responsibility." Folded inside the final page was a photocopy of an old checking account statement, dated the same week as the rejected $8,700 transfer. Arthur had highlighted the withdrawal. In the margin, he wrote one sentence. "I should have questioned this immediately." The statement didn't change what had happened. It simply confirmed another piece of the timeline, another document, another quiet admission. At the end of the letter, Arthur asked for nothing. No forgiveness, no visit, no reply. Only this: "I hope one day Lila knows there was at least one adult who finally chose the truth, even if he chose it far too late." I cried after reading that. Not because everything was fixed. Because accountability had finally arrived without demanding anything in return. I wrote back 3 weeks later. My letter was short. I thanked him for telling the truth. I told him I wasn't ready for a relationship. I also told him I hoped he continued choosing honesty. Sometimes closure isn't reconciliation. Sometimes it's simply ending the conversation without hatred. By autumn, Rowan accepted a position at a small coastal medical center in the Outer Banks. The timing felt right. Lila loved the ocean. I loved the idea of beginning somewhere that didn't know the Vale name. We bought a modest white house with blue shutters 2 blocks from the water. Nothing extravagant, just enough. The first evening after moving in, Lila ran through every room deciding where bird feeders should go. Rowan carried boxes while pretending not to notice she was assigning him impossible jobs. Imogen visited the following weekend with the gray archive box. "I think this belongs to you now." I lifted it carefully. It felt surprisingly heavy. Years of paper, years of truth, years of survival. I carried it upstairs to my office. For a long time, I simply looked at it. Then I opened the lid one final time. Ruth's notebook, the fake email, phone records, birth certificate, Agnes's letters, the Sparrow receipt, trust documents, threat letters, DNA reports, Arthur's confession. Every document that had once represented pain now represented something else. Proof that truth survives when someone protects it. I closed the lid, locked the cabinet. Not because I wanted to hide the past, because it no longer needed to sit in the middle of my life. That evening, after dinner, Rowan stepped onto the front porch beside me. The Atlantic breeze carried the smell of salt and pine. Lila chased sandpipers across the yard with the silver sparrow pendant bouncing against her sweater. Rowan slipped his hand into mine. "You okay?" I looked toward the porch light glowing above us. "I am." He smiled. "You've been quiet." I watched Lila laugh as another bird escaped her determined little footsteps. "When I was 19, I said softly, I thought home was the place people let you stay." Rowan squeezed my hand. "And now?" I smiled. "Home is where no one has to earn the right to belong." The porch light stayed on long after the sun disappeared. Not because we were waiting for someone to come back. Not because I expected an apology. It stayed on because this house was built differently from the one I left. No secrets lived here. No child would ever be thrown into the rain to protect someone's reputation. No lie would ever matter more than love. For years, I believed freedom meant proving my mother wrong. I finally learned something better. Freedom begins the day you stop asking the people who wounded you to become the people who heal you. Everything after that is simply living. And that, at last, is exactly what we did.